1 million people had shown up on the website on the day we were about to upgrade everything. They have the money to do it. The only thing that's missing is the vision and the will. You know, a really important point in your life is when you realize everybody's making it up as they go along. It's part of life. It's, you know, something doesn't work and you learn from it and you move on with it.
Dermot, thank you for coming in today. Do the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Tell me a little bit what it was like living in Tipperary, coming to UCD, going into the world of physics, and you kind of know that AI isn't as young as we think it is, right?
Yeah. So look, I grew up in rural Ireland. The only thing I knew when I was in school was I was getting out and going to college. So went to UCD. The intention of studying physics, intention of studying stars essentially, and then took computer science as a subject. Fell in love with computers and that was that, as they say. So I ended up doing a degree in computer science and did a project on neural networks for my final year, and that was probably more years ago than I care to remember at this point. But so AI's been around for a while, going back to, you know, perceptrons and Marvin Minsky and various other bits and pieces, and it's had its ups and downs over many decades, I think, at this stage.
Did you ever think it'd be as in vogue as it is now back in those neural network days?
No, I mean it's interesting because I remember at the time people were talking about speech recognition, not even in terms of AI, but just in terms of being able to talk to your computer, because you watch Star Trek on the telly, and you know it was people were just talking to computers and getting them to do things for them. And I remember my computer science lecturer, one of our lecturers at the time, explaining how far down the road that was going to be, and he was right. Like it took a while, but we've actually gotten there. So I don't know that anybody you know, apart from a few science fiction writers, probably thought in clear terms about how pervasive this sort of technology could and would become over time.
So you've wore a few different hats in a few different types of companies. You've got a real MBA or a mini MBA, and then a kind of a startup MBA for your time at Storyful. What was it like when it was just you and Mark, kind of side by side, going on this journey? Did you ever think it was going to get this big? Was the vision that big?
Well, look, it's you know, it was Mark's vision, and I think Mark had a very interesting vision for the time, and just realizing potentially what was going to happen with news and media and the technology. It was quite a roller coaster. So yes, I had done an actual MBA. I taught on MBA programs and so on. But to describe, it's sort of 3 years working, raising funding, growing a company from 2 people to 30 people, 35 people, and everything that goes with it, including many sleepless nights along the way, trying to build product, trying to get things out the door, trying to serve customers, trying to figure out how to build a revenue model. As the sort of the second or the real MBA that comes with it, you learn an awful lot in a short space of time.
There were some kind of key milestones in that journey, the Arab Spring, and there was so many different types of, pretty, I suppose it takes a village, but was there any kind of turning point where you're thinking, wow, this is really taken off?
The first point was one morning, I was dropping the kids to school early, and I got a phone call from Mark saying, we have a problem with the servers, trying to figure out what was going on. So I dropped the kids off, figure out what had happened was, essentially, it was the Japanese earthquake in Fukushima, and we had gotten the first content related to it. And Robert Scoble, and if you know Robert Scoble, had became infamous for destroying Google Glass by wearing them in the shower at one point, had tweeted this out, had sent out the link to the Storyful story, and 1 million people had shown up on the website on the day we were about to upgrade everything. Right, that evening,
wow,
we were about to upgrade and make all the servers and everything resilient.
Did you just go white as a ghost?
Yeah, there was literally nothing we could do. So, but that showed how you can get a huge audience turning up out of nowhere, and you could get huge audiences for things. You know, other things where we ended up working with Google. So we ended up helping them in terms of they were putting maps together around disaster recovery and various other things. So we actually, when you find that you're you're talking to RTE and somebody's telling you that they can't put a YouTube video on the news because it's not high enough quality, which was the case in 2010, 2011. And then your customers are Google, YouTube, the New York Times, ABC News. You start to realize that you're working with some very interesting companies in some very interesting ways. Obviously, the Arab Spring. In reality, it's when your revenue creeps up to a point that it's hitting your outgoings, and you're actually starting to make some money because then you're proving that you're actually creating value for people, and those were sort of the milestones you didn't actually see publicly necessarily, but they were equally as important as as some of the other moments.
Yeah. So when it was, eventually sold, was that what kind of feeling was that like? Was this disbelief? Was it relief? Like, what was going through your mind?
I suppose two things. One is great as an exit, great that it was sold, and great that it had been a success. Because the vast majority of companies that are founded don't, right? They die.
I think it's like 90%, isn't it? If not more.
They die along the way. But Mark threw a party for the team and for everyone who'd been involved. So a lot of people would help us along the way. And I remember having a conversation with colleague Gavin Sheridan. And it was an interesting conversation because it was, right, why wasn't the exit bigger than it was, right? It was relatively fast, right? It was 4 years. Most companies take longer, and businesses.
4 years is short.
It is, yeah. And businesses are acquired rather necessarily than sold.
Yeah.
So it makes sense for somebody to acquire something. But for us, for myself and Gavin, it was, we were having a conversation around, why wasn't the exit multiples of what it was, and just understanding that we'd sold a business that was probably more dependent on service than product business, and that if we'd focused more on product, we possibly could have. So it's great that it is, but you're also going, what might we have done, and then taking the knowledge that you had built up and then using it.
Tell me about your time at NDRC. Probably some of your proudest moments.
So look, I spent 5-6 years at NDRC, so up to and including the early stages of the pandemic. So went in there in 2016, had spent a couple of years working for myself beforehand, essentially investing in early stage technology companies. As I told people when they came in, I said, look, part of my job here is to get you to figure out in 3 months what it took us 18 months to figure out in Storyful, right? How can we save you a year of your life in terms of, if it's not going to work, let's figure that out quickly and shut the thing down and move on. If it is going to work.
So how do you go on that journey of trying to explain to them that it's not market ready? Because every founder loves their kid.
They do. Sometimes they love they love it too much. Prior to me being in NDRC, and this was actually an NDRC company, when I was doing some MBA lecturing, Ian Nolan, who founded Bright Flag, what was then Legal Shine, when it was an idea, so it was an MBA student of mine, it was still an idea. We sat down and had a cup of coffee. He said, look, I have this idea. And he was talking about the basic idea of what Bright Flag has become. And he said, did you think it'll work? And I went, I have no idea. Said, I have no idea. You have no idea. Nobody has any idea if it'll work or not, and it has worked. Right? It's worked remarkably. It's worked. Ian's built an amazing business, grown it and scaled it internationally. And like I did a very small bit of work with him in the early days when he was mechanical turking, doing an awful lot of stuff physically by hand, pretending that there was AI and other things behind it until they'd actually built the technology. And it's interesting to see that develop. What's really interesting is to see companies grow and flourish over periods of time. So one of the first companies I brought into NDRC was Opening, Andrea Wade. And I'd been talking to Andrea about it before I joined NDRC. She was the first person I brought in to pitch at NDRC. Didn't get investment at that stage. It came back a number of months later and did get after we'd done some discovery work, got investment, worked with her through the process, and she sold that business then through in COVID. Right, it was a entirely done remotely. There's a lot of stuff that was hard to do because you were physically remote and trying to get people to sign things. Yeah. So for me, it's supporting somebody on that journey and seeing what happens afterwards. And then Andrea building a base for IMS in Ireland with the team out of that business. And now she's gone on, started work earlier this year with Delta Partners. It's seeing that journey and seeing companies develop and flourish. That's the really interesting part.
When you're looking at those companies coming through and they put so much effort in, is it heartbreaking from your side as well as theirs when they actually have to just put all the chips on the table and go, I'm out?
No, what's heartbreaking is when they continue when they should stop. That's the heartbreaking point. So taking it as far as you can go and stopping is, it's part of life. It's, something doesn't work, and you learn from it, and you move on with it. It's when people continue too long.
It's like the boxer who continues for those extra rounds.
Yeah, and like I remember one founder sitting down and saying, "Look, this isn't working, and I don't know what to do." I said, "Stop." They went, "But you've invested money in us, and like, how are you going to get your money back?" And other things. I'm going. I said, "You need to stop." And she was feeling guilty about the money she'd taken. And look, that's risk capital. It's like we put in money. NDRC had put in money, some small amount of angel investment money. I said, "Look, what's the outcome going to be in another 6 months?" She said, "Well, it's unlikely that it'll get anywhere." I said, "Well, then stop at this point, because you're only going to harm yourself." And it's some people won't take that advice; they will continue further, and that is it.
Because there's a balance there between being back in your dream and going for it.
Yeah.
Then there's being the persistent, or then knowing when to quit. And depending on the outcome, the Hollywood story could probably be written whichever way.
Yeah, it can, and it's nobody talks about the drowned worshippers, right? So it's Nicholas Nassim Taleb in A Fool by Randomness talks about the guy who there's a shipwreck and he washes up on the beach and said, "I prayed to God and and God saved me." And like there's all these bodies floating in the water and they all prayed as well, and they're all, you don't talk about those, you talk about that's the story, and that's where the focus is and everything else. Paul Hayes had a thing a couple of years ago when he ran it a number of times called Startup Wake, and I think it was psychologically healthy for a lot of people, where they came along and they waked a startup and they talked about how it worked, and he raised a glass of whiskey.
What a funny thing to do.
Yeah.
Sean Blanchard was telling me about his story with Demonware, where he came up with the idea of the bus and to bring them to the conference, get them locked, take them around the city, and it's just bus going around. Such incredible guerrilla marketing, viral marketing. So that's so funny.
Yeah. So look, I think it's to celebrate the successes. I have a view of success. I spent a long time working in GE as a project manager, and my definition for success in projects wasn't just that you deliver the project, but that everybody on the project would be happy to work with each other again, that you'd work with that people, that the people were as an important part of what you were doing. Because you could try and kill people to get stuff over the line, and nobody'd ever want to talk to you or do anything to you again. All you're doing is doing damage to people. So look, the piece for me from working with founders and startups is you have to be honest with them. It's not being mean, or it's not being cruel or anything else. And sometimes you're right, and sometimes you're wrong. But I once described part of what I did as psychotherapy for startups, and it is almost that at times. Sometimes they just need to unload and talk about what they're doing.
Because I'm in recruitment, I feel like I'm a parish priest.
Yeah.
Because I just get everything about what's actually happening in the organization, what the challenges are, what's hype, what's not.
Yeah.
This is what's really happening in AI. And then I see the poster about what it's like. It kind of reminds me of sometimes the Willy Wonka Glasgow experience, when they actually turn up and see the reality of what it's there. And then you're kind of sitting there, okay, now I have to represent you in the marketplace. Let's hold back a bit. So
I had a very interesting conversation last year at a dinner, and the comment that was made is, a really important point in your life is when you realize everybody's making it up as they go along.
Tell me about innovation. There's so much going on. You've got cyber, you've got AI, we had DeepSeek what's Ireland doing well, and what do we need to do better? Because part of me's thinking there's pretty good, pretty solid, and then part of me's thinking this is moving so quickly. We could be just left behind and become one of those kind of ghost towns. And I know that sounds so dramatic, but
Yeah.
it just feels like the rate of change is something we've never experienced before.
Uh, so I'd be careful about that, right? Because I was at a Siemens event on Tuesday night and celebrating 100 years in Ireland, and it was IRDG and the rural electrification. My father, who's dead a good number of years at this point, but he remembers the arrival of electricity, right? Like, so he remembers life. He remembered life before electricity, and my mother, who's still alive, did as well, right? So they remember rural electrification, the arrival of radio, the arrival of television, the arrival of computer, their kids going to college studying computer science. So that's a reasonable amount of change in over the course of a lifetime. So, humans have gone through a lot of change before. Sometimes it's the pace at which people throw things at us puts us off balance, and it's keeping us off balance is the problem, not rather necessarily than the technology that's going on. Innovate. Look. I'm CEO of IRDG, Industry Research and Development Group. Our focus is on supporting companies engaged in innovation and R&D. It's a non-profit. It's the mission of the company, and essentially innovation's been the through line of my career. So everything I've been doing, whether it's as a graduate in ESB, General Electric, Storyful, whatever else, it's about creating new products and services and supporting people creating those. There's a phenomenal untold story in Ireland of innovation, right? And it's everywhere, right? It's in every pocket of the country, in the companies. So we're at a national level, we're at full employment right now. A lot of that is due to the innovation that's taking place everywhere around the country, in startups and SMEs, in large Irish companies, in multinational companies that are based here. So whether it's Fexco in Kerry, whether it's Kingspan in Cavan, whether it's I was down the other day in Alcon in Cork, and they're making some of the most advanced implants for lenses and in eyes in the world, and the R&D is being done here. It's a team that they've built up. So they started on that R&D journey less than 10 years ago in Cork. They've been in Cork for over 20 years, but they started on the R&D journey less than 10 years ago. And they've built up a team of over 30 people designing and developing products that are the best products in their class in the world for what they do. And part of what they're doing now is there's 30 people in R&D, there's 600 in manufacturing, and they're figuring out how they can automate a lot of the things they can do in the manufacturing. There's a lot of digitization and everything else going on, but there's a phenomenal level of innovation going on in the country. My concern is that we're not supporting it, and that we don't have a joint up vision of what Ireland can be. One of the really interesting things to me about when Patrick Gagan, who's a historian in Trinity, was talking about Ardnacrusha, was a 25-year-old engineer had a vision of the country where electricity was available everywhere. The unit price for that electricity was the same for everybody, no matter where they were, and you could get access it in any part of the country. That's an incredible vision for a young man over 100 years ago, right? In a country that was coming out of a civil war, where the Department of Finance said no, you can't have the money because it's too much, and the Taoiseach at the time overruled them. And I see that problem now, in that one of the things we're doing is we're putting money away for a rainy day, and actually it's raining now, right? It is. So we have a problem with housing, obviously, and our housing infrastructure needs to improve. We have a problem with energy, and our energy structure needs to improve. So, and this isn't just about FDI. So decisions are being made now about the next generation of FDI, and we're well placed to win those because the quality of our talent pool. I mean, it sounds like a cliche, but decisions are being made to put things in Ireland now, not because of the monetary value or the tax value, because the talent pool that's here is some of the best in the world in a number of areas, in pharma, medtech, and manufacturing and others. And we can win that. So we need to support that. We need to have a vision of To my mind, we need to have a vision of a country that is 100% renewable, that is, our rivers are pristine. We have, flourishing agriculture. We have, and a mix of building on native talent and global intellectual knowledge and value creation. And we are capable of doing all that. Part of it involves the government at a policy level doubling the amount of investment. And we started the Innovation Index with KPMG 2 years ago. And one of the things so it surveys a couple of hundred companies every year. We did some AI analysis as well this year. Part of that saying that for every €2 that Denmark spends per head of population, we spend 1. So we're spending half as much on them. So it's not just about, whether Silicon Valley and AI will overtake the future. It's all the things that go up to make the world, all the supply chains, all the chip manufacturing, all the production of precision engineering equipment and so on. We need to be investing in that, and we need to recognize the value of it. We have the money to do it. The only thing that's missing is the vision and the will.
Please give me 30 seconds of your time. It blows my mind that only 9% of listeners actually subscribe to our podcast. I'm going to ask you one favor. If you like and enjoy this podcast, please can you subscribe? That one thing will really, really help us and the team get you the very, very best guests. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. How do we had Brian Caulfield a couple of weeks ago sitting in the same chair, and he kind of talked about, incentivizing entrepreneurs with the taxation, taking the money that's in the bank that people don't even know what's in these kind of historic bank accounts, and start investing into different companies and kind of rolling that out and incentivize people to go on that journey. How do we kind of create an ecosystem that's probably a little bit more vibrant, because it still feels a bit kind of siloed? It's people doing maybe similar things, but maybe not kind of brought together.
I think we have some very interesting cultural traits in sometimes as Irish people where we don't realize how good we are, right? We can be a little bit too humble. But the counter side of that is we say we don't know something and we go and figure it out. So we're actually good at building things. We're good at product, and we're good at creating things. We're also good storytellers. If we can pull all of these things together, and when we pull those things together, we can do some phenomenal work. I think there's across the entire value chain. So if you look at the universities, right, we can probably spin out more out of what's in the universities right now. That's not necessarily about throwing phenomenal amounts of money at it. Partly, one of the things I would do is that everybody who's doing a postgrad, who's doing a PhD or master's in science or technology, should get some entrepreneurial training along the way. They should get exposed. So when I was in NDRC, we ran programs with Enterprise Ireland and a number of the research centres, and we exposed groups of 25 researchers to pre-accelerators. And they did that over 6 weeks, and most of them hated it. Most of them said, I never want to be an entrepreneur. I'm very happy to go and work in a company. But some of them went, oh, I never knew what this could do. And they get an inkling for it. If you take everybody and you put everybody through a system like that, you will open people's eyes to what's possible. And I would rather see a demand coming where you've got really smart people looking for money and chasing money, rather than us just trying to push money into the system. Because there's a danger when you push far too much money into the system that you end up wasting and do funny things with it. I do think we need to put more money in the front end into the universities. Equipment is years old, building collaboration between universities and industry. We've done a lot. There's a lot more that can be done on that side, and with the spin outs and with scale ups. And so there's things that can be done all across the system. Some of it is money, but some of it's not money as well. Some of it is policy and structural, or small amounts of money to go with that.
And so it's highlighting some of the innovation that's happening here that mightn't be as shiny and as kind of clean as some of the other aspects. So kind of bringing that out and having that marketing amplification as well. Doubling. So if there's 1 billion investment in innovation, that's moved to 2 billion investment. So having that kind of monetary as well, and then bringing people through that kind of incubation stage and kind of what about? There's one in Japan that kind of comes to mind where they had these workshops where they took people that maybe were barbers, worked as clerical officers, kind of a mixed bag of different professions, and over a 6 week period of time, they upskilled them with AI ready skills. And they could already see that they had developed the mindset to go in and start in kind of junior positions to rank up. And it was a wonderful kind of showcase about how you could take someone who wanted to do it and develop those skills up. Tell us a little bit about the workshops that you've run, the kind of half-day workshops.
Yeah, so one of the things we have with IRDG is we have an innovation skill net. So in partnership with SkillNet Ireland, which is again one of the phenomenal things that goes on in the ecosystem here in terms of supporting skills development and training at a national level. It's 72 skill nets across the country. So one of the things I did at the end of 2023, I thought I was making a guess that there was an opportunity to do some training for companies around AI, and we sort of, right, how will we do this? So we developed with the lecturer from the Technical University of Shannon Tuss a program called AI for Personal Productivity, and that was essentially 6 half days with 35 to 40 people online with a lot of breakout sessions in it. Not just learning about the tools, but learning how to use the tools and learning how to prompt, and then figuring out what were the challenges people were having on the day-to-day lives and how they could use those tools and technologies in the day-to-day. And part of what I did with IRDG is our entire team sat in on the first program. So everybody in the team did the very first program. Now we're into the 5th program. We're over probably about 200 people at this stage have gone through the programs. And there's a huge amount of demystification and learning and everything else going on, and a huge amount of really interesting creativity. So we had one senior manager in a company who realized that video would get more attention than pure PowerPoint or a document. So he took some of the tools and he built a video out of some of the presentations that he had, and then got a student to do some QA and topping and tailing on the back of it, and used it to pitch for I think it was 6.5 million of investment, which they got successfully on the back of doing that, which was a small little thing in the middle of a course, which gave turn the brain on. So I think it's people are the experts in their own domains. Yeah. But if you combine the deep expertise people have in their own domains with tools, people will surprise you about how they start to use these tools.
Yeah, and I've seen this even when on Saturday I was doing an event for Fraught Ireland and Best Cities. We had 50 CEOs, and I did the presentation, then we did the workshop, and I was thinking, okay, well, you've got problems specific to you. There's opportunities to brainstorming straight away with ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity, where you've got Einstein in your pocket.
Yes.
That can literally brainstorm your problems with you.
Yeah.
There's the opportunity to create really good content, not the really poor kind of content that you'd expect in the first version of ChatGPT, actually really polished content. And then you've got the data analysis piece. Getting your data, cleaning your data, visualization, not just boring pie charts when you had to or two.
Yeah.
You've got these beautiful visualizations that are easy on the eye. And then you've got that, take that and then make really, really effective presentations. So these are areas that you could start to use day to day. But what I love the most about it is you can fine tune it to be trained on your own customer brand, which is an extension of that brand. So rather than sucking up 4 million websites like OpenAI did, you can now have your own proprietary data set that's learning and fine tuning off that, and then suddenly you're not reinventing the wheel. You've developed a workflow of standard operating procedures.
And quality data and having quality of input data is critical in terms of not just Gen AI, but in terms of other AI tools and technologies. One of the things I was doing myself was using some of these sort of tools in interesting ways and getting all sorts of interesting output. Like I had a question at one stage. So talking about gender balance and manufacturing and high tech and industry, where a lot of our companies are, again, tends to be male dominated. And one of the things we do is, running events, we're trying to have a good gender balance across those events in terms of speakers and other things. But sometimes you host an event and 50 people turn up and there's 3 women in the audience going, well, why, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I did is we looked at our own database. We have, 10,000-15,000 email addresses from people who belong to member companies in our database. So like, how do I find out how many men and women are there? And I downloaded all the first names, so no personal identifying information or anything else. Fed it into ChatGPT and asked it to come back, and after a little bit of fooling around with it to get it to analyze it properly, got it to come back and tell me that about 75% of our database was male, about 20% was female, and 5 to 10% it wasn't quite sure because the first name was. And I gave you a couple of examples of names. So even even just being able to ask, think of the question, and being able to do stuff like that that you.
And this is the thing: people don't want insights from all the data. They just want insights from their data. And then if you can sprinkle in the industry data, people are very, very bought in. And that's where I always get worried and concerned, where I hear these huge population sizes or feedback on surveys, when I know the vast majority are probably online bots that have answered it. I'm more interested in the smaller cohorts, those insights which you can start to kind of figure out because it's really proprietary.
Yeah.
But that's where a lot of companies, when they go on the journey, is you'll see, and obviously collecting that proprietary data is probably one of the most challenging parts of the job.
A fascinating, so we have a guy called Bob Cooper who essentially developed stage gate process for product manufacturing, global expert. Bob's in his 80s, but he's still, he will put most 20-year-olds to shame for his energy. So he came over last year. He was in Germany and came to Ireland for a couple of days, and we had him in a conference and a workshop. And one of the things he was talking about was and he spent 2 years figuring out how to take everything that he does and has been doing for 40 years and how you use AI to improve all of these things. So one of the things is
standard operating procedures, was it, or just how he was doing his job, day-to-day job?
He's literally written the book on how to develop new products.
Yeah.
He's worked with Disney. He's worked with Ford. He's worked with some.
So he gives a roadmap.
So he talks you from idea all the way through to production, and how you review at each stage in the stage gate process, which is a global manufacturing standard for companies. And he was talking about the very upfront piece, right? How you figure out what to focus on. And he said, go to places people are complaining about stuff, right? Online forum, Reddit, other places. Take all of that in. Use AI to figure out what the top 3 complaints are. Use that to go and look at your product and figure out where you can add most value for customers. So you can actually hoover up huge amounts of data in a very short space of time. It's very specific data.
I love that example.
Yeah.
And when I was writing my book, what I did is I went and looked at all the other AI books, got all the 1-star reviews, took it, asked ChatGPT to analyze all the 1-star reviews, and then I said, right, my book has to solve that problem.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And that was my marketing strategy.
Yeah.
Because you're literally taking all that insight and you then put it onto an Excel, a beautiful visualization, and you can start to figure it out. For me, AI literacy now, particularly what's happened with DeepSeek, has now become front and center. Has to happen, because we need to start to know how to use these tools, because anybody can download this onto your laptop now.
Yeah, and it's about augmentation of what we do rather necessarily than replacement. I was talking to somebody this morning who writes for a living, and he's not going to use AI to replace what he does, but he did our course, and if he uses it where it makes sense for him.
It's for brainstorming of ideas, right?
Yeah, or if you're doing something that you don't do very often, right, but that task has been done lots by other people. Probably, ChatGPT or Anthropic or one of the other tools, Perplexity, whatever, will have a way of giving you that answer very quickly that thousands of other people have essentially come up with, right? That's effectively what it's doing. It's giving you the average of a lot of other things. So you might struggle for 2 hours to try and figure out what the answer is, or you might get a good draft in 2 minutes. And then you can actually look at it and go, and this is where human judgment is important, is review it and kind of go, yeah, okay, that 3/4 makes sense. I'm not sure about that, so we'll take that bit out. But you've then saved yourself a couple of hours work.
So we have a tradition on the podcast where the previous guest asks a question.
Okay.
That you have to answer. And the previous question was, you've got a product.
Yes.
And you want to really make it scale.
Okay.
Internationally kind of scaling. What are the three pieces of advice that you would offer yourself to get that scalability, that you don't go too focused in the national market, but you try to go global? What do you do? How do you go on that journey?
I think the one most important piece of advice is make sure it solves a head and fire problem, right?
What does that mean?
So if it's a really important problem that somebody has and you fix that problem, then their awareness of that your product exists essentially will create a pull, right? If it's a nice to have, if it's number 27 of their top 30 priorities, who cares, right? So first of all, you need to focus on the customer. And secondly, as part of it, you need to focus on that you're fixing something that's really important from a customer's perspective. When you hear about products taking off, essentially what's happening is they're solving a very common problem for an awful lot of people. A lot of the time it seems obvious, right? There's a simplicity that comes on the other side of complexity in when you're trying to get to product market fit that people talk about, right? But you go through a whole pile of pain to get that simplicity, to distill the understanding and insight down and create a widget that somebody loves, or create a piece of software that solves everything. And I would also say the simpler the better, right? So don't try and make the thing do too much, because people can only absorb stuff. A lot of interesting companies that I've worked with and companies I've talked to overbuilt their product to start with, and the customers weren't able to take it on board. But a simpler version of the product, they were able to take and use.
And then how do you get it out to people? I suppose it depends on the product, but what is it? Is it viral marketing? Is it, what are some interesting strategies you've seen?
So it depends on who the customer is, right? So is a consumer customer? Is it a business customer? So I'll give you a really interesting example. Barry Kennedy, who's CEO of IMR, I was chatting to him, and his daughters, two of his daughters, have started a business, and it's a hair product, and it's the number one selling product in Brown Thomas, and it's in a whole pile of Irish stores, and they're distributing it internationally. And they came up with the idea, they sourced the manufacturers, the contract manufacturers. They've done an amazing job of doing this. Their viral marketing is with their grandfather, right? So there's TikTok granddad on TikTok with the granddaughters has had over 100 million views.
That is incredible.
And it's genuinely funny, as Barry said. They were going to the cinema there before Christmas, and two teenagers came over, and teenage girls came over and said, "Are you TikTok granddad?" And then it was like, could you take a photo, not just a selfie, take a photo of us with TikTok granddad? So he said he's now reduced to being taking photographs for his 85-year-old granddad. So, but that's actually, it's come from somewhere really authentic. It's come from an existing relationship between the grandparents and the granddaughters that everybody can relate to, and then it's incorporating that into a product, and it's worked.
Dermot Casey, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Mark Kelly, founder of AI Ireland. We're passionate about collaboration and sharing the incredible stories behind every AI journey. That's why we're always looking for guests to join our in-person AI Ireland podcast experience. If you're working on innovative AI projects or have a story that can inspire others, we want to hear from you. This is your chance to share your insights, experiences, and ideas with a really vibrant community that's as excited about AI as you are. So if you're ready to be part of this conversation and help shape the future of AI in Ireland, please get in touch today. We can't wait to collaborate with you. Thank you.